I'm Gerd Leonhardt, futurist in Zurich, Switzerland. I talk about the future, I give speeches, I write books, I make films about the future. In this show today, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, what it means for work, for people. We're going to talk about the future of the planet, the new planetary system, the way of moving towards people, planet, purpose, and prosperity. And we'll also talk about how we can solve the climate change and global warming emergency.
Welcome back to part two of our delicious conversation with Peter Leiden and Gerd Leonard. Gerd is one of the top-rated futurists worldwide. He has presented over 1,700 leading conferences around the world, including for places like the European Commission and Microsoft, etc. He's named one of Wired Magazine's UK, that is, most influential Europeans in 2015, and is listed globally as number 7 ranking in futurists. Peter Leiden was the managing editor of Wired magazine, working with founders, and subsequently founded 2 of his own media startups. His latest book, most recent book, is called The Great Progression 2025 to 2050. We've been talking a lot about ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, the potential threats of it, and the enormous benefits of it. And Gerd described it as a bit of a premature birth, in that there's been a C-section and this thing has landed in the world, and we're all sort of having a bit of a freak out, thinking, oh my God, what a beautiful baby, and oh my God, this might be the devil's child. So we're kind of going through all these different things. And one of the things that the guys mentioned earlier is that whether we like it or not, I mean, you think back to the beginning of the internet, I'm old enough to remember that very clearly. And at first it was the ba-ding, ba-ding, as you listened to the page trying to load this boring picture. And it's gone from something like that to something that's actually influencing elections and changing people and creating more division and more tribalism. There's a lot to it. There's some great things about the internet, don't get me wrong. But there's a negative side to it, and we need to also understand that with artificial general intelligence, that there's 2 sides to this. There's a bigger piece to it. And we want to get into part 2 of the show here and talk about the bigger picture, because we ended at the part 1 of the show talking about how we, and when I say we, I'm talking about humans, we get very distracted. The new shiny object comes and we start doing the squirrel thing, and we forget to notice what's going on. And where we finished at the end of the part 1 of the show, Peter was talking about climate change as a major issue that concerns him moving forward. But, if you think about it, that's kind of fallen off the headlines for a while. We're looking at the headlines and where our attention is going. So let's bring it back to what really potentially might matter. And these are 2 guys who understand looking at the future, looking at where we're going, what are the things in front of us. So let's start by this very major shift. I wrote a piece about it. I think I told you guys about it, where I talked about the connection between the protests in Iran, about the young lady who was killed by the morality police, the connection between that, the war in the Ukraine, and Brazil, India, and Russia coming together, changing the way that oil is sold and how it's sold. There's so many changes on the global front of power. In that article I wrote about how the U.S.'s seat of power may be threatened at this point, looking at how these pieces connect. I called it a murder board of way things connect. When you're looking at all the other things that are going on outside of artificial general intelligence, what do you think we're missing? What do you think we're not tying together? Because you guys are masterful at tying things together that people don't think about.
Well, I can jump in there because, funny enough, Gerd and I actually did a recent event, actually an online event that was essentially talking about all the paradigm shifts of the 2020s. And Gerd, in his own way, had been thinking about how that was happening, and I was thinking my own way of doing it. And I used this as part of this magazine piece, actually, The Great Progression that you had mentioned earlier. It's actually a magazine piece, not quite a book yet. But
it's fabulous, by the way. I highly recommend it. I read it. It's superb.
But here's the bigger picture way to kind of understand the context for that is one way I've been thinking about it, and I think Gerd and I are kind of in a similar context of this. There's been essentially a mega system of the last 40 years or so that everybody's kind of understood, and it's essentially made up of all these subsystems. And for example, our energy source was all carbon energy, and all our internal combustion engines, and the boomers kind of dominated the culture, and the politics was relatively conservative, and the kind of economics was all the private sector. Anyhow, there's a bunch of ways you can talk about all the little subsystems that work together.
Yeah.
To kind of work. That system, that world, those kind of interconnected systems are failing and ultimately are over, in my opinion. And what's emerging in every one of those categories in terms of the next energy system is clean energy, and the next kind of transportation system could be electric, and the next kind of cultural drivers are the millennials, and the politics, I would say, are going to become more progressive. Anyhow, there's a bunch of ways I think of this paradigm shift between all these categories is happening right now. It's because we happen in the 2020s to be living in this kind of juncture between two different eras. Now, this next bunch of systems, this next mega system is a coherent thing. It's heading towards a coherent thing, but it's too early to really make total sense. And so what's happening is people are watching this breakdown, feeling this breakdown, understanding the new thing. And so we're trapped in this 2020 thing. And I think that's the best way for people to understand what's happening and to try to focus on the world and the systems and the mega system that's getting born. That is actually a better system on better technologies, on better ways. And it provides that new system, I think, does have the potential to solve climate change and some of these other challenges. And I think that's kind of one way I think about it. And Gerd has his own way of talking. So maybe, I don't know, Gerd, maybe you want to riff on that kind of what's really happening. So all the things you were talking about, Dov, we could explain in that context of why is this shifting around? Well, if the era of oil is going down, and if all those petrostates are going to be kind of increasingly less powerful, and all and it's shifting into kind of new, that's going to put a lot of tensions geopolitically. That's going to raise a lot of kind of issues, and so so you're starting to watch all these seams are just bursting, and all these transitions are kind of getting energized, and it's because we're in this crazy time, this transition. I would just say it's kind of between two eras, and it's actually sorting itself out right this decade.
What's your thoughts, Gerd?
Well, if you want to know more about the show, there's we made a small website from this called newparadigms.global, and you'll see all the speeches from Peter, all the links, newparadigms.global, where you can see more about that. But I think personally, today we are like 1968 to 73. I was 7 years old in 1968, so I wouldn't really know. And I lived in the mountains, so I wasn't really aware of that.
You lived in the mountains with a bunch of religious freaks. I knew nothing about what was going on.
No, that was afterwards. But in any case, in 1968, we had this reset that started with the sexual revolution, the music revolution, the end of the war. And in 73, the world was a different place.
Yes.
And now we're here, 2023. It's the same, except that it will take not 5 years. It will take a year or two for those paradigm changes to kick off in a big way. So we are now leaving the fossil fuel era behind. That's a $150 trillion shift. We're leaving the baby boomers and Gen Xers like myself behind, and the millennials are coming in. There's research showing roughly 60% of most executive jobs and political positions will be held by people between 25 and 45. And many of them being women and minorities. We're talking about, this is completely different ballgame now. Right?
Yes.
And so there's a global reset, this agenda, American agenda of hyper-capitalism and stuff, that's all like already down in the rearview mirror. That got lost with COVID and all these things. And now we're moving to this global consciousness concept of we're either going to be fruitful together or we will just die a horrible death together, as the UN, this is not me saying, this is the UN General Secretary saying, it's a road towards either collaboration or suicide. And this is not just, it's climate change, it's AI, it's genetic engineering, it's all of those things. And we're learning today, at this very moment, that our ticket out of this is not just more science and tech, but also more collaboration. And that's putting a huge amount of pressure onto the political system. The only black swan that remains that is totally scary to me and unknown is Russia.
Right.
Everything else I can get a good feel for. I think, not talking about trust here, but
Yeah, I
getting an
understand.
inkling about China and maybe Iran even, and Brazil I have high hopes for, and India, where I go a lot, definitely. Russia is one of those last cards where we're saying, oh my God, it could be
Of the old
total
world.
reset or total disaster.
Right.
So and this period will close this year. I'm certain of that. So
So
2023 will
I'm really
be
interested in
come
how
to
you see.
conclusion.
I'm really interested in how both of you see that, because there's an old saying that when they're losing the power, the grip tightens, and the grip has definitely tightened. And we are more tribal than we've ever, well, not certainly ever been in my lifetime, right? There's such tribalism. There's Republicans and there's Trumpians, and then there's liberals, and then there's extreme liberals, and there's all this. It's so tribal that there's not even two parties anymore. And that, by the way, I'm glad that's getting bigger, but it's extreme. And I personally, it's my opinion, it's not the truth. I personally think the majority of people are, like me, hard centrists. There are some things I think we need to be very conservative about, and I think there are other things we need to be extremely liberal about, and we need to start that with being more human and more humane in the process. At the same time, I see all this as, this extreme stuff around gender and race and all those kind of things. That's all going to fall apart. I don't care. I'm not going to get on that bandwagon, because it's not going to matter. What's going to matter is how we come together as humans. But at the same time, there are still the global powers, and you see that coming to end in the form that it's in very quickly. So I'm going to say, okay, so if the US is no longer the leading economy and it becomes China, which is very likely, and if China is no longer the largest population in the world, it's now India, and China is losing its population, as is, as you know, Switzerland, as is Japan, as is the US. The population decline, all this talk about overpopulation is out of the window, and although it's going to go the other way. Mm-hmm. As that is all happening, I believe India is going to become the greatest force in the world, because they've got a ton of people, they've got a ton of technology, and they've also got a ton of resources available to them. And I see that they could really, really step in and do some pretty great things. But at the same time, they also have an authoritarian leader. So these rays of authoritarian leaders, whether it was Bolsonaro in Brazil, or whether it's the stuff that's gone on in the Philippines. I mean, they've just reinstated Marcos's son. I mean, come on, right? And then you've got the rise of Le Pen in France, and the right in England, and even Germany, which I would have thought would be the last place on earth for a rise of an extreme right, and of course America as well. So, how do you see that playing out?
I'll jump in on that one. It's like, this is completely consistent with what I just was talking about the situation, which is when the world gets in these kind of transitional moments between eras, or transformational moments, it always there's two kinds of responses to it. One is essentially control, hang on, authoritarian response, look to the leader, whatever. I'm freaking out about this system change. Tell me what to do. And so it's not surprising that you've watched, every one of these countries you mentioned, essentially there is a response to this situation. And so you got everybody in Russia's going to Putin, and everybody, Xi in China has got them on, then all Brazil and all, there's all these kind of internal, even in the democracies that could elect people, they look to these authoritarian things like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. Help me. Now, the flip side is that every one of these junctures too, there has at least been a more democratic, pluralistic, kind of open society kind of response to this. And it's much messier. It's much more crazy ass thing. It's, and this is what we've been seeing in the United States. We've been seeing it in Europe. But I would argue at every one of these junctures, it's that open society, that free debate, that ability to kind of elect new leaders and transition kind of peacefully, as peacefully as you can get, that actually works in these kind of times of transformation. Because what you need to do in those situations is you don't know the answer. You can't just have Xi Xi was in China and said, hey, we're going to do a lockdown on the pandemic. And nobody could raise their hand and say, hey, that might not be the best idea. It's like, oh no, we're going to follow that guy. And in fact, the whole economy just crashed because of it. Or Putin says, hey, we're going to go and invade, Ukraine. Like nobody could kind of raise their hand and say, actually, I don't think our military is quite up to snuff and this is going to be a problem. And no, because it's just the one man rule kind of thing. And so at every one of these junctures, the authoritarian things crash and burn over time. Now it takes a while. But every one of these, essentially, ultimately, you kind of evolve in these more open democratic societies. So as messy as it is, I actually feel we're seeing it happen here. And I actually think we're on our way to actually watch this transition. I don't know how those authoritarian things who have not more open societies are going to actually transition, but well, maybe it's going to be Putin's assassinated. Because at some point you got to get out of that breakdown, because it's just one person figuring out the transition in this era is a total disaster. And so I would just say that's why I really am bummed about China, because I was thinking China actually had a reasonable system for kind of every 10 years transitioning leadership and that kind of stuff that could actually end, even though it was relatively authoritarian, it could evolve. But I'm really worried about that in the last 5 years. And Xi, and I think actually, anyhow, we can go down the China thing. But anyhow, in general, that's my bigger picture way to think about this.
Right, but in saying all that, we're still at, I agree that debate has been the thing, but now we're seeing journalism is polluted and may become more polluted with ChatGPT and general artificial intelligence. So, we've got that, WikiLeaks. I mean, it's like you're getting thrown in jail for leaking stuff that is important. I'm old enough to remember Pilsner, right? John Pilsner, that you guys know who he was. I mean, he was one of the great journalists of all time. He's still around. But now, he hardly gets any space now because he's not clickable. And all these things are, it's all about clicks and money and opinions. And, we have Tucker Carlson because he gets millions of viewers telling people bullshit that he doesn't even believe himself. Or on the other side, Don Lemon, or whoever it might be. And you've got the hardcore neoliberal capitalists who are all about profit and let's do the resources and we'll just burn the planet to the ground. And on the other side of it, as people who are talking, I mean, like, Jesus, read a book, they're talking about Marxism. And I'm like, have you heard of a guy called Stalin? You think Hitler was bad? Wait till you find out about Stalin, right? He's going to make Hitler look like your fairy godmother, right? I mean, it's fascinating to me, the human beings lack memory. Like we're so bloody stupid in that we don't look back. So with all this going on one side, I want to see what you're seeing, Peter. I want to believe what you're saying. And I want to see that it's the great cracking open to reveal something new. But at the other side, it looks a lot like pre-World War II and the rise of authoritarianism. My friend I spoke to last week who lives in Hungary, he's an American vet, right? And I said, what's it like living there? Because you're living in an authoritarian state. And he goes, I think we need more of them. I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, or else we're all going to become this communist, extreme socialist countries. And I believe in capitalism. Well, I believe in capitalism too, but not that way. So that for me was really insightful that here's an American who was an entrepreneur, who was an ex-vet, living in that place and very happy with the situation in Hungary. I'm like, okay, we need more dictators.
Well,
he said, yeah, we do.
Can I make 3 points on this? I think the first one is that technology has, because technology is a force for making things more efficient, primarily, it has made the conflicts more efficient as well. And has done that through social media. And the demise of democracy, the lack of trust in democracy, the lack of trust in people is due to social media. Mm-hmm. And that is because we see everywhere that humans suck, basically, right?
Yeah.
And that's what social media tells us. And then social media gets amplified by Hollywood and Nollywood and Bollywood and Nettywood, whatever, right? Because 98% of those films are about psychopaths. And they're about how people are no good. That's what's sex and blood, right?
Yep.
And this is what America is very good at in the film production, is to to cover the world in blood and 50 new shows on the Colombian drug cartels. Yeah, so this kind of thing has led to this polarization of thinking that people aren't good, we're not going to get out, it's all a bad future. And I, in fact, started a thing called the Good Future Project, because I think we need to put the good future back into the limelight and make films about that. And we need to regulate social media to have more humans that tell real stories. We need to do the opposite of what AI is promising, which is more heaps of bad stuff generated by a reductionist force of bots. And that's the one thing. The other thing is we should not take the American dysfunctional society that has been created in America as a problem of the world. Okay, in Europe we have other problems. We're lame asses, we're reductionist, we don't have enough entrepreneurship, all those things. But we're not like this. We have a different worldview on this because we're humanists, just like people have in Brazil or Argentina. Mm-hmm. The problems in America are very particular, mm-hmm. in that they've been queued up for 100 years and getting more dysfunctional by the minute, just like the bridges are getting dysfunctional, the internet is getting dysfunctional, and being covered with more money for a small minority of people. Yeah. I lived in America for 70 years. I think it's one of the greatest places in the world. I believe America will pull itself out of the shit like it always has done, because it has the capacity to do so. But we can't take that as a model for the problems of the world. That it's very particular to what. But
isn't that the way it's sold? Right? Isn't it sold that way? That America is, we know that America has had the head seat of the table of power that is now under some level of threat economically.
Yeah, but I was going to get to that in my third point. The point of power. Go ahead. Okay, the point of nation power is completely antiquated. That is because we will never solve the real things that we need to solve: health, cancer, disease, water, food, energy, spacefaring, extraterrestrials, you name it. We'll never solve that in one damn country.
No.
Right? We can go carbon neutral and net zero in America, in Canada, in Europe, in 5 years. That would be great. But we're still going to die because we don't get the Brazilians, the Indonesians, and the Africans to come along. So this whole topic about what country takes over and what is the most powerful is utterly useless, because it just means that you're in a more privileged position to watch everything else go up in flames. And really what in the end, we're being forced to collaborate or perish. And that will do away with a lot of the conversation about who holds the power and why we hold the power and what our tradition is. It will also do away with the old-fashioned definition of socialism, capitalism, fascism, whatever. None of that matters. The only thing matters, a future-fit economy and something that we can work together to create for all of us. And that is becoming apparent, and that is where the pain comes from right now. Because we're realizing it's like you go to therapy, and the therapist says, if you just change this one way of behaving towards your wife, maybe it could be salvaged, right? And you say, no, I don't want to change that because, it's not, I don't want to do that. It's a unilateral move, but this is basically what we're going to therapy now as the world. And it's painful.
I'll build up that. I love where he's going with this. Another way I kind of think about it is if you take the really big picture of the 21st century. So like I've been talking, when I talk about this great progression, I'm talking about the next 25 years, which is a transitional phase I would describe in the bigger way. Yeah. But if you take this century, which is the 21st century, I think we're going through 3 world historical transitions that are really civilizational in nature. One is we are going to we're going all digital, a digital civilization. And this AI extension is the latest version of this digital kind of revolution thing. But anyhow, that's still got a long way to go, and AI integrated into all our economy. I mean, we just started the show with that. The second one is we got to be sustainable. And we talked about that a little bit in the show too, in terms of the climate change issue right now. But ultimately, we have to get a sustainable economy and society that works not just environmentally, but also socially. So you don't have riots in the streets because there's all these poor people. And that is, we're on our way to doing that. Honestly, historical context, we're really pulling people out of extreme poverty, and we're starting to really make a world that is much different than we've known for the last 10,000 years. The third one, though, is we got to go global. we got to be able to work on a planetary scale, given that kind of challenge of climate change and all that stuff. And we're actually on our way there too. Now, you've been pointing out the kind of tribalism and the kind of, which countries do it. But I'll give you one little anecdote. I was just this last weekend. I went with my daughter. My daughter actually brought me to a music festival down in Mexico City. I'm up here in San Francisco. She lives in LA. And anyhow, I spent the weekend with all these young, Mexicans. And honestly, it was like the same. I mean, they could have been San Francisco, could have been LA, it was Mexico City. I mean, there's this global culture, particularly amongst young people, that are really, it's just totally transnational. I mean, and everybody looked at us like we were just like normal. And I could have been Burning Man in San Francisco, could have been, LA. And now, granted, it was a pretty elite thing, you could say, in terms of one thing, but I would just say that just like there's forces of tribalism happening, there's this forces of global interconnection that's just crazy that we're underestimating. I mean, TikTok, a Chinese app, is like connecting kids all over across. That's not thinking about borders. It's like everybody's passing these things all over the place. And here we are having this conversation, Gerd's in Switzerland. It just seemed it's right in our, it's in the fabric of the society now. You play that out over decades, and I tell you, I think we're more on our way in that direction. So sometimes, as frustrating as this craziness is now, if you kind of just step back, and again, it's an optimistic take on what's happening on, we're just in this crazy big, really almost that kind of change, by the way, by the end of the century is civilizational change. I mean, that's different than the Enlightenment society. That's different than the Roman Empire. That's a society that's a very different place, but that's the society of Star Trek, and the next 500,000 years will be kind of based on that kind of foundation. All digital, fully global, and totally sustainable is the mega story of our time. And we're just in the early phases of that. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that makes me kind of get up every morning and think, you know what? We're in a long play here. It ain't going to be played out in my lifetime. But I would say maybe my kids' lifetime or my grandkids are going to see a different world.
There's a lot of reasons to be optimistic, but there's also a lot of reasons to be cautionary. And I think that we tend to be one or the other. We're, terrified, or we're, wearing the rose-colored glasses. And I think we need to be a lot better about having the discernment we need to have around these things. And, because the instant reaction to what you just said is, so you're talking about a Charles Schwab world where you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, and we're all going to do this together. And I don't want that. I don't want I don't want Charles Schwab to decide what my life is going to be, no more than I want.
Klaus Schwab.
Sorry,
Charles Schwab is the banker. You mean Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum guy?
World Economic Forum. Yes, thank you. The World Economic Forum.
Klaus.
Thank
Klaus
you for correcting me. Yeah, so I don't want a World Economic Forum deciding where this is going. And at the same time, I fully agree, and I've said this since 1989. In 1989, I said, this is the beginning of the fall of the American Empire. We're at the beginning of the fall of the American Empire. You've just seen the wall come down, and you're seeing the fall of the Russian Empire, but it's still malingering all these years later in the form of Putin. And I see that the fall of the American Empire, but I don't know. I don't know that Americans are ready for that. There's a great history piece when I was studying history, and remember thinking about reading about how everybody wanted to go to Rome. Everybody was trying to go to Rome before the end. It was the place to go. It was the place to be. It was the New York City of the world, right? It was like everybody wanted to go to Rome, and then they realized, it's a bag of shit. The whole thing's falling apart. And I often wonder if that's what we're seeing with America. Is like, we're America, we're great, we're the best. And listen, I fell in love with America. I was born in the UK and lived in Australia before I came here. And I fell in love with America. But I don't know it was the America that I have now, that I see now. I don't know that that's the same country. And I think we're, as you said, Peter, I think we're a cataclysmic change. As you said, Gerd, this is an Oppenheimer moment. It's where we're in the brink of absolute destruction, but also absolute transformation. And I wonder if we're sort of all sort of vacillating between being Luddites and and just wanting to smash the machines, or and go back to the farms, or whether we're going to embrace all this, because we didn't even talk about the food chain. We didn't even talk about what's happening in the future of food. I remember I can clearly remember in the 70s watching a show called Tomorrow's World, and they talked about genetically modified food. And I was very excited as a kid watching that, very excited about how they were going to feed starving people. Well, those same people are not living on those genetically modified foods. We're buying them in the bloody supermarkets, and it may be impacting our DNA. There's always more to the picture, is my point. There's always way more.
Can I say one thing about in defense of Europe? I think that if there's any sort of block of countries that I'm excited about, it would be Europe, because I think we're heading towards the United States of Europe.
Yes.
Despite of all of the difficult things, we are making it happen. We're collaborating. We have precaution and proaction. I think we're sorely missing what every American reveres, which is the unlimited pioneering and the sense of freedom that is still there, regardless of all of the reality. Right? And we need to import that a little bit. But I think Europe is in very good shape to be the leader in sustainability. Europe is going to be the leader in the purpose economy. The European Commission is clumsy and slow and loud and weird sometimes, but Digital Markets Act, yes, I think that's a very good step. The AI conversation is a good step. So I think Europe is ready for that kind of leadership. And I can't think of anything better if we take American ingenuity and European leadership on the humanity side, and we bring that together with countries like India, which is very much a mix of the two, really.
Yes.
And China, yeah, that's a wild card. But I think that gives me hope. Also, of course, because I'm half European, half American in a way, I find that to be a good future in the end.
So as we come to the end of this, let's just talk a little bit about, I asked you, what are you cautionary about in the end of part one? What are you most optimistic about moving forward? And what have we got to do to move towards that optimistic future? Jump in.
Well, I'm always happy to jump into an optimism question. Although, we can keep talking all day. I'd love to build on even what Gerd just said there a minute ago. But look at there's many reasons to be hopeful. I mean, honestly, this gloom and doom kind of sense of what's really going on in the world, I think is really misplaced. And again, my piece I mentioned there is one way to go at it, but I've been banging this drum for a long time here. And I'll give you one good reason what's happening here is, as messy as it is and all, the world, despite this saying, we started talking about technologies, is basically the world is kind of defined by the state of our technologies, you could say. If you really go back thousands of years, and it's like whatever you could do with the kind of what was your technological capability at the time.
It transformed whatever technology you had at the time.
I mean, to be fair, that's, it's at least one piece of the puzzle you got to understand. It's not the only piece. It's not just totally defined by the technology, but technology really does give humans this kind of the tools to create the kind of world they want. It can also create a lot of bad things. But let me just say that, and a lot of people outside the tech world probably don't really see this as clearly. So I'm just going to squeeze it down. It's like we're going through literally right now 3 world historic technological transformations. Mm-hmm. We talked a little bit about the internet in the beginning of the digital revolution thing. We're now in phase 2 of that, which is the AI revolution, but it's essentially the next phase of the digital revolution. But it is going to be a transformational thing. We talked about that a lot in the beginning, so we don't have to repeat that. We are going through an energy transformation. I mean, the world has never gone. We are going to go in the next 25, certainly in the next 30 or 40 years, we are going to go from an energy system completely rooted in carbon to one that's completely rooted in clean. It might include fusion energy and all kinds of stuff. If we had time, we could talk about that. But the point is, we are going through a world historical transformation in energy system in an incredibly short amount of time. And the third thing, which you've alluded to, which we didn't really go into detail on, is essentially we are going through a transformation in essentially biological engineering or biotech, synthetic biology. There's a bunch of ways to think about this, but our understanding of genetics and our manipulation of genetics, which is in genetic engineering, but also biological engineering, just how we understand biology now. We are now creating a world that essentially we can grow things and evolve things in ways that can be much more sustainable, potentially, and all kinds of different things. It's not just one, but two, but three world historic technology transformations are going on here, which is going to cause, I would call it, in economic terms, we're watching, they're booms, they're tech booms, and they're going to be economic booms around them. And it's going to really, there's a lot of excitement in that. But it also is going to create all these kind of issues around that, because you mentioned genetic engineering and stuff. That's going to throw a whole different thing we didn't even touch on, which is a whole other way we could talk. It's going to be like it's going to be the AI issue in about the next few years here. We're going to be, it's going to be, can we genetically engineer what? And then it'll be humans or
morals and
humans or what? Anyhow, the point is, but if you think about it from the point of view of our tool set now, it gives humans crazy powers to actually create a kind of world that 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago would have been impossible to think about. And so that's, I think, what's the exciting thing, what's going on here. And it makes me really optimistic, because I actually believe, as much as we've gone through these last junctures, that we had a close call with nuclear energy, nuclear bombs, but anyhow, we figured out how to deal with it. Anyhow, I think we're going to deal with all these, and I think it's going to give us the tools that allow us to make that kind of world a digital, global, sustainable world that essentially is going to be better for our kids. And that's really what I believe.
Fabulous. Good.
Yeah, I think I'm most optimistic on climate change and the possibility of solving global warming. I think we have all the tools and tech. We certainly have the money if we put our mind to it. We're going to have nuclear fusion before too long. We're going to be able in 20 years to go back and fix the planet. And of course, we're going to go to other planets, other story. But, I think we're going to have to each hit parentheses. We're going to have to really suffer for some time for what we've already done. But we're capable of doing even more damage, and then we can go and fix it. That's a 20-year process. And now I think we have global consensus on this. We have the tech on this. We have a huge amount of intergrid technology, climate change technology. The next 1,000 unicorns will be in climate change technology, as many people have said, and the money is pouring like crazy. Once we get out of the depression with Russia, Ukraine, and that topic is a little bit more under wraps and a sort of fake truce or so, I don't know, but something like that will just explode in activity on this whole thing. And it will create hundreds of millions of new jobs. It'll make a new economy. 20 years, we're going to have to suffer because it will be 2 or 3 degrees warmer, but then we'll have the tools to deal with it. And I think now we have consensus. It will hurt, but it's doable. So I think this, to me, pales comparison to the AI topic.
Yeah, I do too. That's what I said right when we started off. I think that we're distracting ourselves with this subject. I mean, it's an important subject. I'm not saying it's not, and it's an important technology, but there are much bigger issues at hand that we need to confront and be aware of and make a difference in.
Well,
and the description I've given all the time is that change is birth, and birth is messy. It's painful and it's messy, and then it's magnificent. But it's painful and it's messy and it's screaming and shouting and shitting the bed and everything else, and then it's magnificent. And in that moment of magnificence, we're likely to forget all the pain. But to realize I'm going to birth, I being the world, I'm going to birth this dramatic change. Well, people are like, yeah, we'll keep the baby inside for another couple of months. Good luck with that.
Decades. Well, I've always said, one thing we need for sure, in my view, is what I call the Humanity Future Council. We need a council of the wise people, not politicians, not CEOs, not the World Economic Forum, not just the UN, but we need a council of the wise people that do nothing else but to look at these things and talk about it and popularize it, and with a header of the good future. That I think we don't have enough of that. We have all the financial, the economics, the political stuff. We have all that stuff. We have the scientists and the academics. But do we have something like a council, like we had in ancient Greece, whose job it is to do that? We really need that, because we're getting into exponential progress and exponential challenge at the same time. So it could be heaven or it could be hell, but we definitely have to do something.
Brilliant. Beautiful, gentlemen.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm signing me up. I want to be on that thing.
Yeah, me too. I'm signing up for that one. I'm part of something called Starts With Us. Have you heard of that? And no. Starts With Us was started by Daniel Lubetzky, right? Who is behind Kind Bars and all the rest of it. And I was one of the founding partners of that. And it's about how it starts with us. We got to change the world, but it starts with us. Becoming these radical centrists who are like, how do I find the commonality between us? How do I find rapport? They're doing some really great work, but it's really about creating this, as you said, Gerd, this council of wisdom and to come together. Gents, this has been a true pleasure and honor. Thank you so much for taking the time. Before we go, please, each of you take your moment and just tell everybody where they can find out more about each of you and your projects.
Maybe start.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe start with this. The best way to start with my work, which is really around the Good Future topic, is the Good Future Film, thegoodfuturefilm.com, that you can watch on YouTube. GerdTube is my YouTube channel, GERD, tube.com, and my website, Future with Gerd, and my last book, Technology versus Humanity, Technology vs. Humanity. It's out in 50 languages, was just released, I think, in Arabic last week. So happy reading.
So not much achieved with that. That's good.
That's fantastic.
Okay, cool. Thank you. We'll make sure that all that is posted. And for you, Peter?
Yeah, my name's Peter Leyden, Leyden, and you can get peterleyden.com. You can get a lot of them around my speaking and writing, and it's kind of that part of my life. And then I also run a company called Reinvent Futures, which is strategic foresight, and also we convene kind of innovators around kind of topics around the future, which I got a big one going here called the Next Progression Series around generative AI, which is here in San Francisco. But you can get that through reinvent.net. So it's peterleyden.com or reinvent.net. You can find all for me, and for there, all the social comes off those websites, and stay in touch.
Fabulous. And again, we'll make sure that all of that is in the show notes. I hope you'll both stay with us to the end. And for you, dear listener, remember that those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of that tribe. Whether it's business or political leaders committed to positively shaping the landscape, they all know that we must tap into what drives human behavior at a best level that's possible. You can tap into the groundbreaking understanding of how to apply the anatomy of meaning extracted from the emotional source code in individuals and in organizations. I'm Dov Baron. I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness their emotional source code to move their tribe, because unified, actualized meaning is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for individuals, for companies, and for the world. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you are looking at the future. Are you looking at it through a single lens of optimism and it's all going to be wonderful and shiny? Are you looking at it through a single lens of, oh my God, it's all going to be terrible? The truth of the matter is, it starts with us. We have to decide what the future will be. We have the technology. We can make a massive difference in this world, but we have to come together to do it. We have to decide that we are going to unify to do that, because as these gentlemen have shared with us, the tools are all there for us. Now it's up to us. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.